Catalina Aircraft Company has engineered the amphibious multi-role Orcon to support Marine combat operations in aviation assault roles worldwide. Drawing on the historic legacy of amphibious aviation operations, the Catalina Orcon fills a key role of deploying and keeping Marines on mission. Designed for expanded O-line flight maintenance, the Catalina Orcon is built to sustain the amphibious advantage. Visit catalina-aircraft.com to learn more.
Hey Scuttlebutt listeners, welcome to episode 246. This week, we welcome 1st Sergeant Chase McGrorty-Hunter back to the Scuttlebutt. Chase is a 1st Sergeant with 11th Marines and the first winner of the modern-day Marine Objective 1 wargaming competition, now known as the Commandant's Cup. And he was our guest for episode 200, so clearly we're fans of this Marine. Chase is here to talk to us about the Marine Corps Association's Tactical Decision Game, or TDG, competition. This was originally Chase's idea, and as he tells it, the Marine Corps Association was the perfect place to host this competition. We talk about what a TDG is and what it is designed to do, what the competition is and who is eligible, spoiler alert, everyone, and how a competition like this will enable the critical thinking and imagination we want to foster. This is going to be a fun competition, and we're looking forward to seeing what you all come up with. This is episode 246. Hey, Scuttlebutt listeners, thank you for joining us and your continued support. I'm Vic. I'm here with William.
Howdy, y'all.
And we're really excited to be welcoming 1st Sergeant Chase McGrorty-Hunter back to the show. 1st Sergeant, thank you so much for being here, especially on a very early Tuesday morning there in beautiful sunny California.
Yeah, glad to be back, definitely. Part of being a Marine is waking up early sometimes, so we're
That's
here.
right, and for making more Marines, right? At Papa Bear there. So
True.
You're on paternity leave, just had another baby. Congratulations to you and your beautiful family. So yeah, most heartfelt congratulations on our end.
Thank you.
So we got you on the show. So you had you pinged us, God, really right before your baby was born, on just this wonderful, wonderful idea about having a tactical decision game competition. Some background for those who have been living under a rock. 1st Sergeant McGrorty-Hunter is were you the inaugural Commandant's Cup champion at Objective 1? Were you the first winner?
Before they formalized it to what it is now, like,
yeah.
So those that have been to modern day Marine or kind of follow its path, there's been a lot of development in how modern day Marine plays out over the past few years, especially when they rolled out the Objective 1 wargaming. I think it was like 3 years ago now. They said, hey, we're going to host a competition this year for the first time. And you can just kind of like show up and just like hop on one of the simulators and play a war game. And basically it was like whoever got the highest score fighting against the computer is going to be like the winner. And they had like a scoreboard going that year. And so I like hopped on it, and I think I got like a 97 against the computer or something like that. And so I ended up winning the first year's like essentially like wargaming challenge at Modern Day Marine.
It wasn't a cup. It was like a thing of whiskey, right? Wasn't it?
Yeah, they sent me like a bottle of scotch from Scotland, which is actually kind of cool because that's where the creators are from. So yeah, I got like this little like bottle of scotch and this little like trophy that's in my office. And like the next year they formalized it into like the whole cup with, you know, the teams that play against each other. It's much more formal. So yeah, I wouldn't, I was at the beginning where they're kind of fleshing out like what does this competition look like. You're
OG, man.
Yeah.
So just that, yeah. So for our listeners, please go back and check our catalog. 1st Sergeant's been on a few times.
And episode 200.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you were 200. Yeah. So, anyways, so this is different though. This isn't wargaming as we would understand tabletop exercises, sand table exercises, computer stuff. Talk to us a little bit about what a TDG is, what a tactical decision game is, how it's different from wargaming, and then why have a competition for that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of tools that the Marine Corps, the military in general, has to allow its members to stress decision making, to become better leaders, to kind of work through friction, develop themselves. And so in the Marine Corps, there's a few that we definitely focus on. We're pretty heavy in wargaming now, and that's kind of been since General Berger's tenure. The Marine Corps has gotten really heavy into wargaming and kind of like permeating that all through professional military education, enlisted professional military education. Like everybody has some kind of flavor of wargaming now. And wargaming is great, and I think that it's extremely valuable. But there's a difference between like wargaming and like TDGs. So tactical decision games have been around for a long time. I think the Marine Corps Association, specifically the Gazette, started to really like catalog a lot of TDGs in the late 80s, early 90s. So like in the gray years, the general gray years, the maneuver warfare is kind of rolling out. Like TDGs became a big thing, and there's a lot of people contributing TDGs. And the big factor that makes a TDG so useful is like TDGs are like a one-stop shop that you can kind of use anywhere, anytime, and it doesn't take the time and resources that a war game does. So when you're looking at a war game, you're probably looking at either an electronic one or a board game, and there's a significant amount of investment to doing a war game. Usually you have to have a facilitator, somebody that's familiar with all the rules that are in that play into the war game.
Kind of like a referee, right?
Yeah, or referee, kind of like playing through it, guiding people through it. There's a significant amount of time to play a war game. You don't play it in 5 minutes. You play it over the course of hours or days or months. And so with the TDG, it's usually a one-page scenario where somebody is the Marines are inserted into a scenario saying, you are the squad leader of X squad, X company, X battalion, placed in this position. And then this is your mission. And then on top of that mission, now the scenario plays out of like, this is the friction point. These are the things that are happening that are probably going to prevent you from accomplishing the mission that you intended to do, or the way that you intended to do it. And now you're put at the horns of a dilemma of what are you going to do now, right? And the what are you going to do now portion is where all the learning comes from. It's where Marines start to get to stress their decision making, to stress their judgment, their prioritization of tasks, their risk assessment of how they're going to, what are they going to do or what are they not going to do, and then ultimately they get to stress their communication skills, because what you want to do is have a conversation about it and put that Marine like on the spot essentially and say, all right, so what would you do? And have them like maybe brief it back in a mission style, or have them write out their answer and everybody discusses their answers. There's all kinds of ways of doing it, but ultimately it's a one-page scenario. It takes less than 5 minutes to read usually. And then you can make the discussion on the back end of that as elaborate or as quick, fast-paced as you want. So these are things that you can always have in your pocket. When we talk about hip pocket like classes, I mean, when I go out to the field, my battery commander and me are pretty good about this. He was super, gung ho about this when he got into the seat, where the last field op that we went out to, we brought a handful of TDGs just printed out, and we would just bring in the troops, after our dinner chow in the field, everybody come under the cami netting, all E5s and below, and we're going to sit down and we're going to do a TDG right now. And we did that every night when we were out in the field. And it's like, you can do that with 10 minutes of free time with your squad or your fire team, or whatever. And so there's just that element of how accessible it is and still how useful it is, because you can go onto the Marine Corps Association website and go to the professional development tab and make your way down to the TDGs and find a repository of 80, 90 TDGs, whatever it is. And you can always make your own, right? And that's kind of like the essence of what we're trying to get after in this competition.
Dude, Chase, love the shameless plug, by the way. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you. So Chase, what makes a good TDG in your mind?
So a good TDG. So we were talking before we got started, right? And I wrote down some like recipes of a good TDG. These are just things that I thought about a lot, and ultimately, like, I got introduced to TDGs when I was out at the academy when I was first teaching there in Quantico, where I ended up meeting with John Schmidt. When I was trying to learn about maneuver warfare, I figured I'd go to the source and start to talk to John Schmidt about like what was it like to write MCDP1. He introduced me to some friends of his that were still in the Quantico area that were there during those general gray years working in Quantico when maneuver warfare was rolling out, and that were helping to develop like some of the first TDGs. Bruce Goodman was putting them into the Gazette. So I sat down and met with him. And from those conversations, like learning like the importance of like TDGs back then, is when I started to get interested in them as well. And I sat down and actually wrote my first TDG which I still have it in my notebook. And when I look at it in my notebook and then I look at the actual one that's published in the Gazette, it's really cool to see because it's just a mirror image of what was in my Green Monster. But I started to write TDGs for the Gazette. And that was ultimately because there's a lot of TDGs out there, but almost 99% of them deal with like landlocked scenarios. So like they're really heavily focused on Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, things like that. And so I saw like there was like a need for focusing on some things that we might see in the future, like EABO operations, so like expeditionary advanced base operations, littoral operations in contested environments, like in the islands, in waterways, things like that. And so that's when I started to look into like, what does it take to make a good TDG so I can put out some like newer ones into the Gazette, and kind of what spurred some of this competition. But so what makes a good one? A couple of elements. So one, there should be like a real tactical problem. So there needs to be a what would you do at the end of the scenario that is going to spur some kind of critical thought by the participants about how do you accomplish the mission despite the competing priorities and the limited resources. So the problem should force a decision. Two, there needs to be friction, right? Because without friction, there is no problem really. There is no decision. So friction is what transforms a scenario into a tactical decision game. So some examples of what friction could be: limited ammunition, casualties, communications degradation, weather, civilian considerations, enemy situations, like the enemy inducing some friction, like maybe they weren't taking the route that you thought, maybe there's more enemy than you thought, maybe they have drones that are now like in the battle space that you weren't counting on that are messing up your stuff, time constraints, incomplete intelligence. So all those things are elements that could induce friction, and friction ultimately is the most important aspect of a TDG. You have to have some kind of friction in there. Number three, realism. So you have to ask yourself when you're creating a TDG is like, would a Marine actually encounter this problem? So you want to avoid fantasy scenarios, unlimited resources, unrealistic enemy actions, things like that. Element number four would be like simplicity, in the sense that the best TDGs aren't usually simple enough to fit into, or they are usually simple enough to fit into a single page. And so like when you look at the Gazette, if you find a TDG in there, it's going to be like 1 page long, essentially, right? Because you don't want to write a novel, and you don't need every detail either, right? I don't need all the background. I just need like the mission, who I am, what resources I have, and what am I trying to accomplish, and then give me the friction. So one mission, maybe like multiple dilemmas that are working into that mission, friction, constraints, things like that, and then I need to make a decision point. I have to arrive at a decision point, and then be able to work from there. And then five, this is like my final note, would be like, there's no perfect answer. So a TDG should create debate amongst the people that are participating in it. If everybody arrives at the same solution immediately, then it's probably not a great TDG. So the best TDGs create multiple reasonable courses of action. And ultimately, like, I think one of the best things is like when I've run a bunch of my TDGs with my Marines throughout the years, and at the end of it, like, if I have 10 people participating in it and I have like 6 or 7 different like courses of action that I've seen like put out there, when the Marines are like, all right, First Sergeant, like, you wrote the TDG, so like, what's the right answer? I'm like, well, there is no right answer, right?
Yeah, I definitely wanted to touch on that because you'd mentioned with wargaming, like for example, for when you won it, there was an actual like data set on how well you did. So yeah, if you could tease some of that out. So like, really, I guess like let's lean into what the outcome or the output is of a TDG vice a war game, or something like Risk, for example, that maybe a lot of our listeners may be familiar with.
Yeah, so ultimately, like, we spend a lot of time teaching Marines like what to think in different courses, right? Like if you're going through certain PMEs or something like that, like you might be getting taught like, what do you need to know and what do you need to think, or like what's the Marine Corps' view on a certain topic. And so we do a good job at that, right? But there's always avenues to teach Marines like how to think, and we do that very well in the Marine Corps as well. But this is more of a how to think exercise with a TDG. Mm-hmm. It's not a what to think. So that's why they've been so valuable in the Marine Corps' like professional military education for decades. is because we're looking at like, this is a tool for you to allow your Marines to think through issues, right? And that comes back to the whole, like, why does a TDG matter? Like the judgment, like you can't memorize a TDG or the problem set. Like if I play the same war game that I played at the Commandant's Cup, I can play that same map over and over and over again and kind of see where the computer is going to go. And like, of course, a computer can obviously change, but like if I'm playing the same scenario, I can get better and better at that one scenario, right? A TDG is going to expose me to a new scenario every time that I want to do it, right? And it should be unique, right? There's so many out there. I can continue to stress that decision-making cycle for myself, for my Marines. There's no memorization. There's no right answer, right? Ultimately, like I'm looking at when Marines give me feedback, like when I'm doing a TDG with them, if I'm like the facilitator or like the person that's guiding the discussion, like I'm getting to assess like where my Marines are at, right?
Yeah.
Like I get to see like who's risk averse, who's willing to take risk, right? Is the risk that they're taking, like, is it showing good judgment or like immature judgment, and like they're not considering certain things, right? That maybe their level of a squad leader or a fire team leader should be able to consider, or maybe they're a Lance Corporal and they're not in one of those roles, but they have this like huge amount of like tactical creativity, and like this is, you know, a person that we could employ in a certain way. Like, so there's all kinds of different things that you can kind of tease out of doing a TDG, especially as a leader. Like when you're doing these with the Marines, you get to learn a lot about like, what is this Marine willing to do, and what's their, you know, decision-making cycle, vice, you know, all the other Marines that are in my room. You really get to tease out like what that looks like with them. And ultimately, like the next war isn't going to give a corporal the perfect information, unlimited communications, and time to think through every issue that they're faced with on the battlefield, just like the last war didn't, right? So we need Marines that can make sound decisions in uncertainty at all times. I'm doing a series on my Instagram right now, the Bayonet Warfighting Society, about Bella Wood and about World War I. And like one of the things that I think is just like, you know, poignant to kind of look at is like at Bella Wood, there's so many Marines that were killed, obviously charging across the wheat field. Like officers were going down because they were leading their men out there, and it, you know, that required NCOs to step up and like take the reins to make it happen, right? And it's just, warfare has been like that forever, right?
Yeah.
And it will be like that in the future, where especially when we're looking at fighting in distributed maritime, you know, areas where there's not going to be an officer in every single AO, or, you know, it might be a squad leader that's the senior man out there. It might be a fire team leader that's the senior person out there. And so like we're stressing decision-making with TDGs, and that's because we need every single Marine, no matter what level they're at, to be able to make sound decisions in complex operational environments. And that's what a TDG offers you.
Well, and you had mentioned time, and I think that, you know, as you're talking about friction points, like time is a friction point that you can impose upon, that it's really hard to replicate even in a really detailed, expansive training environment, like what are they calling it now? ITX, is it still a thing? But you know that time is kind of always on your side, no matter how much you can fabricate, air superiority or lack thereof, or an access denied environment or whatever. Time is always kind of on your side in a TA. TDGs, I think, are a way that we can help impose time as a real friction point for those participating. So yeah, that's really great. I guess on the converse, then, what is a bad TDG?
Yeah, so obviously, like, you know, looking at what makes a good TDG, some of those are just going to be like the converse, like you said, like is going to be what makes a bad TDG. So like some common mistakes for TDGs, I wrote down, I think 5 of those as well. So mistake number one would be like too much information. So you don't want to make a novel. The reader doesn't need to know every single aspect. They really need to know like who you are. So like you are the squad leader of X squad, X company, X battalion, and you are in this AO, and here's some information about like friendly situation, enemy situation, like some kind of like mission, and here's your mission, right? So kind of like that SMEAC 5-paragraph order stuff, just like teased out in a small narrative. And then they just need to be exposed to what the problem set is, right? And faced with a decision point and a dilemma and friction to get through. But that doesn't have to be a novel, right? And that's why it should be concise, because the longer you make it, the less chance people are going to pick it up and want to use it, right? And that's the appeal of a TDG is it's one page. It's one page you can print out and take with you anywhere. You can put it on your phone. You can airdrop it to friend or to other Marines, and you can do it right there on the spot. And it should take like no time at all. Mistake number 2 is that there's no real decision point, right? So a TDG shouldn't just be a situation report, right? It shouldn't just be a sit rep of like, this is who you are and this is what's happening. Like, okay, well, where's the dilemma? Where's the friction? What would you do in this scenario? So there needs to be a decision point. Mistake number 3, no friction. So if everything goes according to plan, that's not war. So there's got to be friction, and that the friction should allow multiple courses of action again. So it shouldn't just be like, oh, here's the problem, and then there's an obvious solution. Mistake number 4 would be like getting the wrong level of war assigned down to this TDG. And what I mean by that is like, you're a squad leader, but you're faced with an operational level or a strategic level problem. Not to say that there's not scenarios in which that could be a thing. In fact, the very first TDG I published in the Gazette was like, you're a squad leader on an island and you're faced with a decision of like whether to target an enemy ship, which is like an operational level, or it could be a strategic level, like dilemma. And so like, you just have to be weary understanding, like, if I'm playing the role of a tactical leader, is this tactical leader facing a tactical level decision? And if they're not, if the situation starts to like bleed over into the operational or strategic level, like just know that you're doing that, right? And do it with purpose. And then you'll be just fine. But just making sure that you're doing something at the right level. Like if the squad leader is like guiding the whole battalion, that's probably unrealistic, because that's
right. Well, it leads into what you were talking about as far as realism, right? Like,
right.
I mean, because there are scenarios where, hey, especially in an EABO environment or with a stand-in force, that you may get a shot on a strategic level asset, but like you said, just understand the realism there.
Right. And so we're absolutely looking at like trying to predict like what does the future look like, and some of those things, like that's why I purposely wrote it to be like that in that first TDG that I published. But yeah, just make sure you're doing the right thing. And that's not to say that when you do TDGs that you don't want to do a TDG that's at a level that you're not at. I think that there's a huge benefit in using a TDG to expose Marines to different levels of war too. So I think one of the first TDGs I ever did when I was like running the Bayonet Warfighting Society, I got like a group of people together after hours, and we did enemy over the bridge, which is like the first TDG really that kind of got published in the Gazette, I believe. But that was one that John Schmidt wrote back in like 1989 or something like that. And it was basically like Cold War style, like you're a battalion commander and you're faced off against, you have tanks and you're a tank company and all kinds of other stuff. And it's like, well, if I'm a corporal and I'm put into the position of a battalion commander, like, is that realistic for me? And it's like, well, no, you're not the one that's actually gonna make that decision, but you get exposed to decision making at that level. And hopefully you get an appreciation for the decisions that a battalion commander would have to make and why they would make those decisions, because you practice it in a TDG, right? So there's definite benefit to using TDGs at those levels. It's just that when you're writing them, you need to understand what level you're writing them at and make sure it's appropriate like that. And then mistake number 5 would be trying to like trick the reader. So the goal is not to trick the reader or stump the Marines that are reading through a TDG. The goal is to challenge them. So just making sure that you're writing to that. So it's not hard to write a TDG. Like it takes a little bit of time and a little bit of dedication, but like you can just write a TDG. Like every Marine that's in the Marine Corps, I believe, has enough resident knowledge in their MOS, in the Marine Corps in general, to be able to write a TDG. And if they want to get really good, they can do a little bit more research in certain areas and they can make their TDG even better, I'm sure.
Let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Echodyne's high-fidelity radars for maritime missions ensure expeditionary forces maintain decision advantage from shore to sea. Rapidly scale, evolve, and maneuver. Echodyne is trusted by defense organizations worldwide. Learn more at echodyne.com.
And now we're back. To your point about the conciseness of it. Now, I know when I was growing up, as a dinosaur 2 decades ago, TDGs was also a way to because it was more of an oral tradition. Like you said, it was a hip pocket thing that you would do, and then if you got the time, so it was more of an oral tradition. And so the practice of it, you would practice basically calm. Like, I'm going to give you an oral Frago, essentially, you're going to then learn how to listen and transcribe and then communicate that and then communicate your decisions as if we're doing all this in, on the move over, company tack, battalion tack. How has that changed? Because you'd mentioned, everybody's got this ability to access, the things electronically. Has that changed, or is that oral tradition still strong in the TDG world, or is that something we're still pushing for, is sort of practicing our communications?
I think it just depends, right? It depends
Okay.
on like what you're trying to get out of it, right? And I say you as like the proverbial like leader that's running the session where you're trying
Hmm.
to use a TDG as like a learning tool for your Marines. Like you can tailor it. Like I can take 2 TDGs right now, right? And I can be like, all right, this first one, we're going to run through it, like kind of like the way you said. I'm going to brief it to you almost like a frago, and like you guys aren't even going to have a copy of it, and you're just going to like jot down notes like, all right, friendly situation, enemy situation, mission, admin logistics, command and signal, what resources do I have? All right,
Yeah.
I'm going to write down my problem dilemma, and I'll be like, all right, you have 5 minutes to make up your course of action. And then if 5 minutes elapses, time's up. Everybody drop your pens. All right, Smith, what are you going to do? And then they stand up and they brief it. Like they could brief a Frago style, like, all right,
Yeah.
situation, enemy, friendly, mission. I mean, just they can brief the whole thing just like you said. And so like we can work through their mission briefing skills. We can even incorporate like fake radio transmission, right?
Yeah.
You radioed to me. I'm higher right now. Okay, cool. Cobra 6, this is hacksaw, whatever, right? Stand by, and then like they can go through it. So you can practice all those things just like that. And then I can immediately end that scenario. I could pick up another TDG, and I could say, all right, here's a TDG, and I can hand everybody a piece of paper, and it has like the whole TDG printed out on it. I can say, read through it. Everybody's read through it. Any questions about the scenario? No? Okay, cool. 5 minutes, go, or whatever the time limit is.
Yeah.
And then as soon as that's done, we can say, all right, Smith, what would you do in this scenario? And just like talk through it, right? Like,
Gotcha.
I
Right.
was thinking this first sergeant, I would do this, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what's your reasoning behind moving this asset there? Okay, does anybody agree with that? Or do you think that there's a different way? Oh no, I wouldn't move that asset there because then that constrains me doing X, Y, and Z. And like, so I've done it both ways. I've done it both ways where one is like you're in the moment and you're
Yeah.
briefing it as the person. And I think like originally that's how TDGs were started and intended. In fact, when I talked to John Schmidt about it, like he said, like that's exactly how he intended TDGs to be, is like you put them in the scenario and you're like role playing until everything's done. But I more often than not using the second way, and this might just be like my haptics because I was an instructor at the academy, where it's like everything is an opportunity to have a guided discussion where you really get down to the root cause of like why people think the way they think. And so I typically run them in a guided discussion format where it's like, all right, Smith, why would you do that? Okay. And then I'll like pick through it and I'll be like, okay, in my head, I can be like, all right, that's probably not, he's not thinking of something. Anybody else got a different way of thinking about that? And then I have the students, the Marines, whatever, kind of parse through why are they thinking the way they're thinking, and then getting different points of view kind of shared throughout the group so that collectively we're all moving forward and like learning from each other. So
Yeah.
you can do it either way, and it really just comes down to like either the facilitator, how comfortable are you leading a guide discussion, how comfortable are you with your own mission tactics, or because ultimately like if you're facilitating it, hopefully you're one level above like the Marines in the sense of like education or experience or whatever, so that when they are briefing it in a mission style, that you're able to spot when they mess something up. All right, you forgot the friendly situation. Like, what are you going to do without the friendly situation? Or if you're doing a guide discussion, like, can you lead the guide discussion? And you don't have to be a master. You don't have to have gone through 3 years of teaching at the academy like I did. Like anybody can do a guided discussion, right? You're trying to figure out how to guide the Marines so that at the end of the 10, 15, 20 minutes of doing the TDG, everybody's come away a little bit better.
Yeah, you're enabling that learning. Yeah, that's really good. So you had mentioned our repository. Thank you again for the shameless plug. But one of the things that you had noted when you first were submitting TDGs and writing your own was some of those TDGs, as you'd mentioned, especially like Vietnam era, Cold War era, although the sort of the underlying intent of them or the underlining learning objectives might be the same. The way that they are executed be getting a little stale. So that's a little bit of the impetus behind this competition now, right? Is to also not only to test the Marines' minds, but to also sort of expand upon more modern concepts into this tactical decision game thing, and to get people starting to think rather than just going back to the old stuff, student body right, student body left. That we're getting into, what does it mean to be in an access denied environment? What does it mean to be, like we said, at a tactical unit level, dealing with strategic level outcomes or potentially strategic level outcomes? Can you talk a little bit more about that and how this competition now is facilitating some of that?
Yeah. So I think there's like, you can go in there and you can do enemy over the bridge, right? The original TDG, it literally during the Cold War. So like you're fighting against the Soviet Union, essentially, like in a landlocked battle in Europe, essentially is what it is. Right. And so like, there's value in doing that TDG still. There's plenty. Right. And a lot of the TDGs that have come out in the last 20 years that were centered around Iraq and Afghanistan, like you're heading down through a village and you're talking with an elder and you're, going into, a mud hut kind of thing. And like, so there's value, and you're countering IEDs. And so like, there's value in doing those because the Marine is still faced with the dilemma, the friction point, the having to make a decision, the communicating that decision, like all of those things are still innate in the TDG. So it's not like there's not value in those, but also to your point of what you're saying is we're also looking at fighting in different type of environments with different kind of constraints moving into the future. Not to say that, you can't ever predict what the next war is going to be or the next dilemma is going to be completely, but you can prepare yourself for whatever the most challenging dilemmas that you could possibly face are going to be. And so like, that's why I think trying to re-energize some of the TDG repository, get some new TDGs, like some new blood out into the Gazette and out into the space that Marines can use them, where we focus on aspects that are going to be challenging in the future potentially. So one, expeditionary advanced base operations, because Marines are increasingly going to have to operate in small distributed formations. So trying to stress that through the TDGs. Another one that we kind of talked about is like contested logistics. Generals, the comment on the Marine Corps, General Smith says it all the time. He used to say it all the time when he used to go and speak as the ACMAC in different places, is that, we have the pacing threat, right, that we see in like the National Security Act. And then we have like the pacing function for the organization, the pacing function being logistics. And so like, there's the old saying, was it amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics?
Logistics, yeah.
Yeah. And so like, there's that old saying too, right? But ultimately, like, when you look at fighting in contested like littoral spaces among island chains, whether it's in the Baltics, whether it's in the Pacific, doesn't really matter. Like, these are just very complex operational environments. And one of the most complex things is, how are we going to supply the force that's going to fight there? Right. And logistics is behind all of that. So, focusing on like, what would a TDG look like for doing logistics, or just incorporating a small amount. It doesn't have to be a logistics centered one, but like incorporating a small amount of logistics into the TDG. And I hate to use like myself as an example on this one again, but like the first TDG that I wrote, like there was an element of logistics being a constraint in the problem set. Like, you are a squad leader on an island, you have to do a medevac, you're low on your supplies, but then there's enemy in the area that you weren't accounting for. And it's like, well, if you don't get this hit with this bird, you're not going to have supplies. Your guy's not going to get out, and he's probably going to die because you've expended your long-term care. And so now you have like these constraints. So like, just factoring in these things so you can start to think about what the future fight looks like, because it's not the same scenario as if you're doing a TDG centered around Afghanistan, where you have a Black Hawk on the way in to come pick up your guy in an hour. You're doing sustained long-term casualty care, right? Which is something we have to think about in the future a lot. And then like littoral operations, like working in an island or coastal terrain, maritime choke points, expeditionary bases. These are all things that are just inherently different than Iraq, Afghanistan centered TDGs, Cold War centered TDGs, where you're landlocked. Like, these are very different operational spaces. So what are the problem sets that come with those spaces? Not being able to move, living or working in contested communications environments where maybe I can't key out on the radio. maybe I have certain things that are just constraints to me because of the operational environment or because of the enemy that we're facing. And so like thinking about fighting against maybe a peer or a near peer adversary vice an insurgency. So those are two different things. And so what does that take or give you? And that ultimately kind of comes back to like the whole, I mean, maybe like the grander purpose of like why a competition like this is important, why doing TGs is important, is like when we arrive back in a place, which I think that we're at now in the world, where we're facing like relative parity across across some of our adversary sets. Like if we're facing parity in some of these areas against near peer or peer adversaries, well, what's going to set us apart? It ultimately comes back to the individual behind the weapon set. Like if they've got the same gear, the same weapons, or the same capabilities essentially that we have, then like the only thing that's going to be the decisive edge is going to end up being the individual, right? And the individual's mindset. And that's one thing that we're really great at in the Marine Corps, and that we need to continue to like, don't rest on like our previous accomplishments, but like continue to get great at like making the individual the weapon. And like that's the mindset of the individual, and that's where these things come into play. So I think, yeah, just jazzing these things up, getting some new blood out there as far as like TDGs, so that there's new stuff running through the Gazette, that Marines are able to like focus on what does a future fight look like, whether it's in the Baltics, whether it's in the Pacific, whether it's in Europe still, but like based against what's the future threat.
Yeah.
So.
Well, an aspect that I don't think we've had to deal with in very, very long time, and definitely not in my time, is like, what do you do with the host population? Like, it's really easy to have this sort of sanitized, like, hey, you're just on an island. But I mean, in reality, there are people that live there. And normally when we would talk about host nation, in our previous TDGs or previous thought was, are they friendly or are they enemy? And now you're dealing with the host nation population that could be both or neither. And so are they a resource? Are they, and so you get to think through much different levels of complexity than I had to. And I'm sure it's similar for you when you were coming up to this stuff too, when we start thinking about who's actually with us there as we're, supposedly we're no longer alone and unafraid, right? So, all right, really great. So, all right, so let's talk the specifics then of this competition. So we're looking at something getting started here in about what, 10, 13 days, right? And
we're rolling out in what, June 15th is?
Yeah, June 15th. What are people who are interested in participating, and what are we looking to get from them?
Well, I don't know if you or Will want to hit on most of those things. I can kind of give some like broad brushstrokes of things I think that we're trying to aim at. But you guys can definitely like probably be a little bit more specific, just because I know you guys are kind of like parsing out some of the final rules, prizes, whatever, like things like that. But I think generally we're looking at like a timeline of rolling out this episode and then actually like making some social media posts and like generating some buzz about this. Leading into the June 15th is like the start date. So we're going to open it up as like a 1 month window where you can submit your TDGs, whether it's in like a Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, whatever you need to do it in, but submit them to the Marine Corps Association starting June 15th, and then that competition closing out July 15th. So you have a month and some change to kind of come up with a TDG, which is totally doable. And then get them in there. And then after that July 15th window, I think we're going to go into judging probably for like 15, 20 days or whatever it is. Go into judging and then release some winners probably at the end of July, early August. And with those winners, I think one thing that was important to me when I first pitched this to the Marine Corps Association was like, let's make these prizes like tailored towards continuing along that same theme of like of rewarding people, but like also stressing like education, right? And so like I think that's where like we were like, hey, let's utilize like what Marine Corps Association is good at is like, rewarding Marines. That's what they do around the Marine Corps with all their different awards programs. But like rolling out like a plaque or a trophy for first place, but then also that first place is probably going to get like a squad worth of books from the Commandant's professional reading list. So like whether it's like, With the Old Breed at Peleliu in Okinawa by Eugene Sledge, like there's 25 copies of that. Now you can do a book club amongst your entire squad or whatever. And like that's something that they can continue to refine and create the capabilities with inside their units. And then like, second, third place, again, like a plaque. And then like, so here's a group of books from the Commandant's reading list, like make your Marines better or whatever.
Yeah.
Which I think is just really cool. And it kind of continues down that track. And then ultimately, like, there's a flyer that we're going to push out on social media that has like, what are the focus areas, and that being like expeditionary advanced base operations, contested logistics, operations in littoral environments, who can enter. And that's like any Marine, any MOS, reserve, active duty, whatever.
Actually, any person. Yes. That's one thing for sure that we are making an adjustment. So obviously we totally welcome any Marine, but we also welcome anybody who's just interested in tactical decision game and going through the nuts and bolts on this. So active duty, veteran, or civilian, fanboy or fan person, please, all comers are available or eligible for this competition. So yeah, that's really great. And then, so now that we know what a TDG is, just like what First Sergeant was mentioning, submit your TDG, not your TDG results. We're not looking for solutions, because we're not going to be providing you with a TDG. We're not looking for the solutions. We're looking for original tactical decision game narratives with all of the elements that First Sergeant mentioned, one page based on a realistic scenario, and then any accompanying graphics. So please, starting June 15th, submit your tactical decision game. We'll put the entry email into the show description. Again, June 15th to July 15th will be the window for submissions, and then we will have a 15-day judge period and all of this good stuff. Please also feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. But like First Sergeant mentioned, we'll be putting out this flyer, the announcement. We'll hitting it on socials, and we'll put more of information into the show description. So we're really looking forward to seeing what you guys have to think, how you guys are seeing the world, and then what you think is a way that we can continue to challenge young minds to think through this really complicated battlefield environment that we're in. William, did I miss anything? Are we?
No, I have one question. I
Sure.
think the issue of writing the scenario is probably the easy part for a lot of Marines. What would you recommend, Chase, in terms of actually creating the map image, so that some of these Marines may not have as much virtual or physical art creative chops, but they have the intellectual chops to write the scenario. What do you recommend for that?
Yeah, so I think like William's bringing up, like having a map is a crucial part of a TDG. Like you got to have some kind of orientation for the Marines. I don't think every TDG has a map, but I think like probably most do. And they can be like as rudimentary as you need them really to be. I've published a few TDGs in the Gazette, and you can go into the repository, and this is like another shameless plug for Marines. Like every Marine that's active duty can get a free Marine Corps Association account, or and so you can access the Gazette, you can access the Leatherneck online, like the online version, for free if you just go and sign up. And then that also gives you access to the professional development tab that allows you to see all the TDGs. So if you're active duty, there's no excuse, you can have a free account. So if you go in there, you can look at all the different maps, and you can see like some are very rudimentary, and some are probably more complex. Like I think I did my first one on PowerPoint. I sketched a free-formed a shape of an island, and I actually went to like Google Earth, and I found an island in the Philippine archipelago, and I was like, all right, let me like draw that on PowerPoint and like make it super easy to like kind of see. And I just sketched out some things. And I said, all right, this is a ship, and this is a drone, and this is an island, and this is where my squad is at. And I just put a squad symbol, right? And so it can be really simple like that, just on a PowerPoint is honestly my suggestion. I actually took a Google Earth image of Taiwan for, I think, the second TDG that I made. I think Google Earth image is probably a little too much, because it gets kind of weird with like copyrights, and then also with like how detailed it is for printing purposes. So I would caution people to try and make it on PowerPoint, or if it, at the end of the day, if you just need to sketch it out and scan it for the competition purposes, like we can probably make it like, I'm not trying to create more work for the Gazette, but like if it's a good one, like, and we want to publish it, like you guys can just make it on PowerPoint for them. But
that
like,
will definitely take,
scan
something
it
on the
and
back
like
of an MRE box. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Like at the end of the day, we'll make it happen. You can just sketch it out. It could be very rudimentary. Like ultimately what you're looking for is like, put down some terrain, like what terrain are they facing? Where are they located? Where is the enemy located if there's an enemy? Like just things like that. It can be very simple. You don't have to get wrapped around the axle of like, oh man, I don't know how to make a map. You'll be all right. Just have something. And then ultimately like the situation, we could probably parse out like what you're trying to get after and maybe improve it if we need to. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. We got to just make a map. It doesn't have to be anything crazy, and just get it in there. I think two other points that I would just like hit on for Marines that are like looking to enter this is, kind of as a secondary, like means of a prize is like, these are going to run in the Gazette. So like whether you're first, second, third place, or just like an honorable mention, like, and you have something good, like we could see these rolling out in the Gazette, like all throughout the year, a TDG rolling out in the Gazette. And so like you will, have something published in the Gazette. And why is that important? One, you're helping to improve the organization as a whole. So you as a corporal, sergeant, lieutenant, whoever, you're helping to improve the entire organization by putting your thought experiment out there like that, which is why it's important to write for the Gazette, write for the Leatherneck, things like that. But also, selfishly, this is something that you can use to show your leadership that you are participating in the professional organization of the Marine Corps, and that actually reflects very well for your own professional development. So for E5s and above, so sergeants and above, lieutenants and above, we all get fitness reports. There is a block on your fitness report that is marked professional military education. This is like I'm a first sergeant plug, so like I got to tell you these things. But there is the professional military education block, and like a lot of Marines just look at that as like, oh, well, did I attend my professional military education, like, or not? Did I go to sergeant school or not, or EWS or not? Like, and it's so much more than that when you actually read into like the PES, the Performance Evaluation System, like manual, and understanding like the PME is like, how are you participating in PME too? Like, are you a member of the Marine Corps Association? Like, literally being a member of the Marine Corps Association, you can put that on your fitness report in your like other category, your PME category. You can put member of the Marine Corps Association, and that is actually supposed to reflect better so that the people grading you, your reporting senior, your reporting officer, they see that you are a participant in the professional organization. Now, if you publish an article, if you publish a TDG, if you write for the Gazette or the Leatherneck, like you should definitely be listing those things down in that professional military education box, and your leadership should be grading you appropriately. They should be marking you higher in the PME category than other Marines who are not doing those things. And so this is a way to really boost and show your leadership that you are taking an active role in bettering the organization, maybe more so than your peers. And if you're a corporal and below, and you get JPES markings, same thing. Like you write your accomplishments. As a Lance Corporal, you write your accomplishments in your JPES. You should be putting in, submitted a TDG to the Gazette, published a TDG in the Gazette, won first place in the Gazette TDG competition. Like these are things that, man, you should be absolutely standing out from your peers. These are things that you can use on meritorious boards, on NCO, the quarter boards. Like, man, I would kill to have an NCO that was put on a NCO, the quarter board, or a meritorious board that had submitted to the Gazette or something like that. I'd be briefing that in a second as a first sergeant on one of those boards. And so, these are also things to think about, is like this helps you, like the work that you're going to put in is going to help the organization, which is the most important thing. And like breeding good Marines is like the most important thing, but also it comes back full circle and it helps you tremendously. So that's a shameless plug.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then for our civilian counterparts, I mean, yeah, there's a lot of pride, I think, that you can take in having, submitted into a, Marine Corps Association competition and having, walked away with the belt. So that's pretty sweet. Figuratively, we're not giving out.
And I've had, he was a manager at a civilian company that is kind of in the defense tech industry. He reached out one time because he used the very first TDG that I submitted. He used that and he ran all of his employees through it, and they're like somewhat tied into the defense industry. And so he's like, I wanted to stress them with like, what are the people that we're going to be supplying our technology
that's awesome.
to
Yeah.
go through? And that was really cool to see, like 30 civilians that are in like the IT, like kind of like defense industry, like go through an EABO situation so they could better understand like the realities and the complexities of like what we are potentially going to deal with in the future as Marines. I thought that was like super cool to see, like there's applicability even outside of the Marine Corps with situations like this.
That's really great. All right, First Sergeant, thank you so much for this idea, and thank you for helping us craft this competition. So again, between June 15th and July 15th, please submit an original tactical decision game narrative with whatever map or graphics that you want to include in that. Think short, think sweet, 1 page. It's got to be realistic. It's got to be relevant. And yeah, we're really looking forward to your thoughts. I mean, this whole endeavor is to continue with, a lifetime of dedication to learning, to education, to more. We really want to encourage the process of thinking rather than the outcomes of it. And so I'm really looking forward to this. We'll put the submission email into the show description. And I'm just really excited, and I'm so glad that you came up with this idea, and I'm so happy that we're able to host it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited to see some of these submissions and help grade them and really just see them go out into the fleet and hopefully get Marines jazzed about writing and contributing to the Gazette and starting TDGs and then ultimately just doing them with their Marines.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you again, William. Thank you again for coming on this early in the morning. And let's rock and roll, folks. Scuttlebutt is a production of the Marine Corps Association. You have heard the voices or contributions from Major Vic Rubel, USMC retired, Nancy Litchman, William Truding, and our guest. Ty Frazier is the editor, sound engineer, and technical producer. The Marine Corps Association is not an agency of the U.S. government. The opinions expressed in this episode are the personal views of the participants and do not reflect the official position of the United States Marine Corps, the Department of Defense, or the Marine Corps Association.